Thank you so much, Daniel. Yeah, so as he said, my name is Shaylin Wallace, and I work with the Nature Trust of New Brunswick. So for those of you that don't know who we are a charitable land conservation organization, and I will be going deeper into who we are and what we do. So I'm first going to start off with a question. So I want to know if people know how much land is currently conserved in New Brunswick. So you can write your answers in that chat box for any guesses. 4%. Good. 5%, 7. No idea, 18%. Okay, so good. Glad you guys are giving me some guesses there. So in New Brunswick, we have 4.7%. So it's low, and in Canada, it's currently 10.6%. But Canada's goal is actually to conserve 17% of its land in 2020. And in New Brunswick, the goal is to be 10% now. The hope is to get 10% of the land by 2019. So as you can see, we're not even halfway there. So there's still a lot of work that needs to be done to be able to conserve some land in New Brunswick. So our organization is about conserving land and hopefully conserving more. So today I'll be talking about the Nature Trust. I'll just give you guys an intro to who we are, what we do, our mission. I'm in the stewardship department, so I will be giving you guys more information about stewardship and what we do. If you guys have other questions about other portions of the organization, I'll try to answer them at the end, or I might try and direct you to someone else that might be able to give you a better answer. And then I'll also be talking about iNaturalist, because that's a really useful tool. So I'll just give you some information on how to use that. And then I'll finish off with just telling you guys about some of the key activities that we're doing on the Nature Preserve, what all the things that need to be done. And I'll be giving you guys some side information, such as invasive species or different surveys that we've been doing. So first, I'm going to start out with the Nature Trust's mission. So we have 3 major pillars. The first being to conserve land. So we want to conserve areas in New Brunswick that are ecologically significant, establishing them as nature preserves that remain protected forever. So currently we have 65 nature preserves across the province. This map doesn't show all of them, but as you can see, a lot of them are clustered near Fredericton and the Bay of Fundy, but we do have some elsewhere as well. So we are now over about 9,000 acres of conserved land. So when we do conserve land, there's different ways that we do it. So it's not just that we own every piece. There's different circumstances for everything. So for some of our preserves, we have full ownership. And so that can be someone gifts the land to us. We can do it through a bargain of sale, either life interests. Then there comes into leases. So we can have leases on nature preserves, conservation easements, and then we also do private land stewardship. So I'm just going to give you a couple examples of these nature preserves that we have. So one of them being South Wolf Island Nature Preserve. So this one is just, as you can see in this map, it's just off of Blacks Harbor. And this one is full ownership. This is one of the nature preserves we got pretty early on when we established in 1987. And around this, there's a lot of bird wildlife. And so you can't actually be on this island between May 15th to August 15th because we want to leave it alone for the birds. And there's actually a lot of whales that have been spotted off of South Wolf Island as well. Second is Mapleton Acadian Forest Nature Preserve. So this one closer to Fundy, and this one was protected in 2017. It is full ownership, and the reason why it ended up being protected is because of the Elgin Eco Association really pushed for it to be protected. and it has some mature hardwood species in this nature preserve and quite a lot of bird diversity as well. So for those of you that are near Fredericton, I hope that you guys have heard of Highland Park Nature Preserve. So this one is on the north side of Fredericton near Barker's Point. And so we got this property in 1996, and I will be talking about Highland Park a little bit more. But Highland Park is actually a lease agreement. So we lease it from the city of Fredericton, and so every 10 years we renew that lease. And so we have 4 other nature preserves that have the same process where we have to sign leases either every 5 or every 10 years. And then we also have conservation easements. So this is on Ziegesar. And so this is near, as you can see, it's near Kingston. And so with a conservation easement, it's more so that there's protection on the land. So every conservation easement is different. It can be sold to other people, but the land is normally conserved for wildlife. And so if it switches hands, that it's still in place. The land is still conserved for wildlife species. On this one, there's actually buildings on this conservation easement, but there's an agreement to either not expand or not to build another story. But every conservation easement is very different. So this will be, if this was ever sold, it would still have the protection for wildlife, but it still could be sold to someone else. So we have 6 conservation easements currently. So as I was saying, we only have 4.7% of land conserved in New Brunswick. So we have launched a campaign called Conserve Your New Brunswick. And the goal for the Nature Trust is to hopefully raise $10 million to double the amount of land that the Nature Trust protects by 2030. So at that time when we launched this campaign, we were at 8,000. So the hope is to get to 15,000 acres conserved by 2030. So we've been doing this through just education, but also trying to, we have some properties that we're trying to acquire and sometimes need to raise funds for. So for an example, right now we're trying to protect property near Gemsag, and this property has wetlands, has bobolink, which is a threatened species, and currently we're trying to raise funds to protect this area, which has 420 acres. So the second pillar is to engage with the public on the importance of land conservation, New Brunswick's natural heritage, biodiversity, and species at risk. And so part of that is also through the landowner stewardship program. So our conservation department will work with landowners who have a strong conservation ethic and want to help with the ecologically significant areas on the property and want to know how to care for them. So our conservation team will go out to these landowners, look at their land, look at what kind of vegetation there is, and they will give them management plans on how to properly care for their land to help species, especially species at risk. And then the third pillar, the final one, is to steward. So to steward the nature preserves, which we use through a network of volunteers and supporters. After these properties are made into nature preserves, that's definitely not the end of it. There's still so much work that needs to be done on these preserves to make sure that invasive species are removed, that we don't have encroachment, that everything that we want to be happening on the preserve is still occurring. So the way that the Nature Trust does this is through using a lot of volunteers and supporters. And if anyone is on this call right now who's a volunteer, thank you so much. We really need our volunteers. Because we have 65 nature preserves, there's no way we could get everything done without them. And in this photo, actually, that purple flower, I'm fairly certain is a purple loosestrife, which is an invasive species. So there's a lot of things that need to go on with these nature preserves, and yeah, we need volunteers for all of them. So I will be focusing on stewardship, like what we do on these nature preserves. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, my email will be at the end of this presentation. So if you had any questions about anything I said before, feel free to shoot me an email. So I'm just going to get into how stewards or volunteers work with our organization and how stewardship works. So we have a stewardship committee who is some people who are volunteers. Sometimes they have conservation backgrounds. Maybe they're just really interested in conservation, have been doing it for a really long time. And so they help us make decisions on our nature preserves. Sometimes maybe there's a restoration project that we're thinking about doing, but we bring it to the stewardship committee first to see if that's something that we should go ahead and do, because we have limited resources. So once they give us a decision, then the staff, like I, will go and implement that, and we will also use our land stewards or volunteers to help us complete those tasks. So what a land steward might do on the preserve. So normally we require, if you're a steward or a volunteer, to complete annual monitoring. So we need to monitor our nature preserves once a year. So 65 preserves need to be looked at least once. So if we have volunteers going out and doing that for us, it's great. So they will normally go out, look at the nature preserve, and then they will complete a monitoring report that we have that has a list of questions of things that we are interested in. Then if there's any problems, or if maybe something really interesting was on the nature preserve, they'll communicate that with our staff, and then we will make that as a note as something that needs to be completed in future years. Volunteers or stewards will also do things like maintenance tasks, public events, educational programs, help us with species inventory, any special projects that might occur, and then they will also help with our management plan or action plans. So every nature preserve also has its own management plan. So some things when we are looking at these preserves, so what we are looking for is changes in land use. Threats, so anthropogenic, which is human. So human or non-human threats. So this could be things like maybe there's a forest fire, or there's been ATV use or campfires, etc. We want to know about the conditions of our signs, whether or not they need to be replaced, the conditions of the trails, and any infrastructure. We also want to know signs of breaches in the land use policy, so we don't allow ATV use or wood harvesting. And then we also want to know what wildlife or plants are around, so any rare species, even common species is always good to know. And we definitely want to know if there's any invasive species on the preserve, and if so, how much they've spread. So all of these things would be included in a monitoring report, so they've given a description about what's going on. A lot of people like to use eBird or iNaturalist, and I'm going to go over iNaturalist quickly right after this, and we can use those observations into our reporting. And then a lot of our volunteers will also use Avenza or GPS. So Avenza is actually a free app on your phone that is a handheld GPS, and it allows you to take waypoints or allows you to track where you've been in an area, which is super helpful for us if you're taking waypoints. If something happens or someone finds an invasive species, someone's cut down a tree, etc., you can use Avenza to take a waypoint and send it to us, so then we can go back later and see where that's at. So I'm just going to go quickly into what iNaturalist is if no one knows what this app is. So iNaturalist is a free app that you can get on your phone, and what it does is it can document wildlife, flora, fauna, observations that you have. And what's nice about this app is that if you take a photo of a plant or animal or bird and upload it to iNaturalist, the program itself will probably try and figure out what that plant is for you. It's not always right, but it'll try and give you a best guess. And then whenever you post that photo, someone may try and confirm that for you, or say, no, that's not it, this is what it is. So if you're having trouble identifying some plants, iNaturalist can be a really good app to use to figure out, to identify that plant species. So you can just go on your phone or your app store and download this app. And so all of our nature preserves are within iNaturalist. So if you went to projects and went to click a new observation, in the locations, you should be able to find a nature preserve in there. If you're at one of our nature preserves, we have it in there. And there should be hopefully already some plants that are listed in that nature preserve. So once you add that in, you can go and either take a photo at that moment, or you can choose an image, and then you would choose what project you're talking about. So right here we have examples of Burpee Bar Nature Preserve or Normac Nature Preserve. So I just wanted to show you that, like, we will look at iNaturalist later, so even if you're not a steward or a volunteer, if you're on that nature preserve and you want to log some observations you find, we will come back to this and add this to our species inventory so that we know what is on these nature preserves. So now I'm just going to get into some of the stewardship needs that happen in the nature preserves, why our volunteers are so important, how much work we need to do on these nature preserves once we acquire them. So I'm just going to go through all of that. So the first one is invasive species removal. Invasive species take a lot of time because it takes so long to eradicate them. So for those of you who don't know what an invasive species is, it is a living thing that is introduced to a new environment and typically causes damage to their new ecosystem. This is because they can take over areas so fast and they have no natural predators for the most part, and so they're able to easily spread and outcompete other species. So for the Nature Trust, we just focus on invasive plant species, but there are invasive fish and insects, I think, as well. So I'm going to go over some of the main ones that we've been dealing with at the Nature Trust and give you guys some information about how we've been removing them as well. So the first one is woodland angelica. So as you can see, it has a white flower and it has a purpley stem as well, and it normally grows in open, disturbed areas. So for woodland angelica, we have been removing it at least at 3 nature preserves that I know of. And so what we generally do is we pull these plants before it flowers. You might actually see woodland angelica right now. It's probably going to die soon, but yeah, I think some of them are still up. So generally they'll start flowering in the beginning of August, but if you start pulling them beforehand, then you could avoid the flowers spreading and going elsewhere. If you can't get it before August, then what we do is we will cut the flowers off first, and then we will put them in garbage bags, and normally we'll let it sit for a couple weeks just to make sure it dies before throwing it to a landfill, because we don't want it to spread elsewhere from there. This picture that I'm showing you, these are 2 wooden boxes. So this is a new thing that we have done this year. So this is at Blueberry Hill Nature Preserve near St. John. And so why we have these wooden boxes here is we just want to avoid having to move woodland angelica from one place to the other. So instead of throwing them in garbage bags, we're just throwing them in these wooden boxes and letting them decompose on their own. But I just want to tell you guys that woodland angelica can irritate the skin and eyes if it's in contact with the sap of the plant. So if you are ever going to remove this plant, definitely be wearing gloves and make sure your gloves don't touch your eyes. It's not as bad as, not even close as bad as giant hogweed, but it can irritate the skin. The second one is Japanese knotweed. And it's the worst to get rid of. Woodland angelica can take 3 to 5 years to eradicate, but Japanese knotweed can take up to 20 years. It's a very persistent plant. So we have been tackling Japanese knotweed on, I think, 3 nature preserves right now. And so as you can see, this plant, it's very big. They have like bamboo-like stalks, and then it will flower generally in mid to late August. And it's generally like at least 5 feet tall, if not taller than that. It's definitely, it can be taller, yeah, probably 6 feet tall. So what we have been doing with this Japanese knotweed is we cut it at the base. We do not pull it you do not pull it, because if you pull it, you might risk the roots coming apart, and that will just spread further. So the risk is, they say, is way too high to be pulling this plant out, so you should be just cutting it at the base. And generally, you want to avoid letting these flowers spread as well. So if you do it right before it's gone to flower is probably the best, but if they start to flower, just be really careful that it's not spreading elsewhere. And once we cut it, we again put it in garbage bags and let it dry out for a couple weeks before throwing it into a landfill. And then after we're done cutting it, we tarp it with plastic sheets. A lot of other people who remove knotweed do not go with the tarping. They might go with chemicals instead, and it is known for being, it can take less years to eradicate, but we, as a nature trust, we do not use chemicals for removing, so instead we tarp it. I'm going to show you guys an example. So this is we did this year at P Point, and it is near Black's Harbor by the ferry. And so you can see at the top, this is a huge patch of Japanese knotweed. So we cut it all down, bagged it, and then we took this plastic black tarp and put it on top, just covering or holding it down with rocks and sticks. So Japanese knotweed doesn't like sunlight, so that is why we are covering it with the tarp. It is a thin tarp, so some of the knotweed might shoot through. Maybe we didn't cover everything perfectly, or maybe the weather will push our tarp a little bit and allow sunlight. And so whenever that happens, then a shoot will come through, and the next year we'll just cut it, maybe put duct tape over that tarp and make sure that there's no sunlight. But if this tarp was not down, the patch would look exactly like it does above. So it can grow really, really fast and come back. So it's a very persistent plant. And the third one that we've been dealing with is glossy buckthorn, another species that's very hard to deal with as well. So these guys are a shrub-like plant, and they can be from like 2 to 5 feet tall. They are shade tolerant, and so you will find them throughout the woods. And these ones, most invasive species are normally spread by humans, so us walking into an area, letting seeds get on our pants or our shoes, and then going to a new area and spreading it again. But glossy buckthorn, it can be spread like that as well, but it can also be spread by birds. So birds will eat these berries, fly to a new area, poop them out, and then glossy buckthorn is up in those areas as well. So they can spread really easy. And so at Hyla Park Nature Preserve in Fredericton, if anyone's been for a walk in Hyla Park, glossy buckthorn is probably the main shrub species throughout the park. It is everywhere. So this is another species where people will use chemicals. They'll cut the stem, apply glyphosate on the stem, and then the plant will die. But again, we don't use chemicals. Also, definitely probably not a good idea in a wetland that floods constantly. But so what we have been doing instead is doing a HUGELKULTUR technique. So we had a student a couple years ago who researched our options, and we decided to go with this one. So it's a common gardening technique, and so what you do is, for us, we cut down the glossy buckthorn, you put it down, you put on compost or soil material on top, cardboard, and then you'll plant native vegetation on top. So this is at Hyla Park right now. If anyone goes for a walk through Hyla, you might see this at the end of the trail. We have planted some shrubs and native plants after this photo was taken. So it so far is doing really good. We'll see what happens. It's just a test. It's a very small area, and we're just going to see if it works. So that's pretty much all for invasive species. Just wanted to let you guys know too that there's a New Brunswick Invasive Species Council as well. So if you ever have any questions, you can go to their website and ask them any questions that you might have about invasive species, the removal, and if they don't have the answer right away, they'll definitely find the resources for you to help you as well. So for activities that we also do in the preserve, so second one is boundary monitoring. We have to do this about every 3 to 5 years. So what we have to do is check if there's any markings along the boundary. You have to clear the boundary so it's clear as well, so you have to brush it back, especially if there's alder. It takes a really long time to brush back alder. And then we might mark the boundary with boundary tape if it's not obvious. So most of our boundaries have been done right now, but we do have to go back every 3 to 5 years and brush it back, and it takes a long time. It would take you a full day with probably like 8 volunteers to do it. So we really appreciate having volunteers helping us with that, especially for some of our nature preserves that are really big. Third one is trail maintenance. So we have about 24 nature preserves that have trails on them, and so that's a lot of work, especially for if we have a trail through some maybe new regen that's kind of brushing back the trail, like Hyla Park. Actually, it's a pretty hard one to brush back because of the glossy buckthorn. So there's a lot of work that needs to be involved, but we do have some volunteers that feel comfortable going out on their own and actually getting other volunteers to help them out without needing much guidance or help from the Nature Trust, which is perfect for us because we have so many. So if there's a couple of nature preserves that can be done without much help from us, that makes it a lot easier for us to focus our attention on something else. So one of the examples is Coe Taylor Nature Preserve. So this one is near St. Andrews, and it actually has a really, really big trail system. But we have a really good stewardship group down here who have been doing the trail maintenance all on their own. So they will come to us to ask if they need trail markers, or maybe they need to reroute a trail because it's too wet in one area. But for the most part, they do go out and do the trail maintenance on their own. And actually today I have a steward who is creating a trail on our Normac Nature Preserve, and she's been doing that all on her own. So very much appreciated. The fourth is to do beach and garbage cleanup. So some nature preserves might have garbage that's been there for a while, and we kind of stumble upon it every so often and need to clean that up. Or some people have been using these nature preserves and have been dumping their garbage on there, so we need to clean that up as well. But we also have a lot of nature preserves that are along the coast. We have a lot of island nature preserves, and yeah, a lot in the Bay of Fundy region. And so when that tide comes up, we get a lot of garbage up onto the shores that need to be taken care of. So we have been doing the Great Fundy Coastal Cleanup. We've been doing that for a few years now, and so we get a lot of volunteers that come out. We pick one day, and everyone goes out and just cleans up the beaches. And then we have other partners like cooks who will come out and pick up that garbage for us after we've collected it. So we have gotten so much garbage off the beaches by doing the Great Fundy Coastal Cleanup, and it helps whenever you'll have a lot of people working at the same goal. If it's just one person on a beach that's filled with garbage, it's kind of discouraging. But what's nice about having this is you'll have 20 people working at one beach and you get a lot done. This year, because of COVID, we weren't really able to do that as well. We did do the Fundy Coastal Cleanup, but we couldn't have large groups coming together. But we were still able to clean up a good area across the province. And then the last one I'm going to talk about is community science, which is my favorite. So we have a lot of, we normally want to do plant surveys or bird surveys on all of our preserves. We actually need a lot of bird surveys done in our nature preserves. We try and get them done every 3 to 5 years, but we think we have at least over 20 that really need a bird survey. So if anyone out there who's near a nature preserve who knows birds, please contact me because we need some bird surveys, even though obviously it won't be done till next spring. But generally that's what we always want, bird and plant surveys. But then we also have some more specific surveys that we have been doing. So I'm just going to talk about those a little bit. So one of them is the Maritime Marsh Monitoring Program. And this one is through Birds Canada. And so this is focusing mainly on marsh bird species. I think we have 4 nature preserves that are currently in this program, one of them being Hyla Park. And so what this is, the purpose of this is to generally kind of find these primary species. I don't know if it's zoomed in enough for you guys, but species like American bittern, Sora, Virginiana rail, American coot, Nelson sparrow, etc. So there's a sound recording that you take outside with you, and you do a playback and you listen for these bird species, and then you record if you heard them. And then you record any other species that you might hear as well. But this program is mostly focusing on these primary species, which is kind of nice. So you don't have to know every single bird species that there is. They're really looking for those marsh species. And so this is generally done 2 times in June and July. But I think it's a half hour before sunrise. So it's a very, very early survey to be doing. And so we have found some of these species. In Hyla Park, we have found, this is a Sora. So there is Sora in Hyla Park. We've also found Nelson sparrow in St. Russ Marsh. or Thompson's Marsh, sorry, and a couple other nature preserves. So we are finding some of these primary species, and all 4 of the nature preserves that are in the program, all of them have been done by volunteers. So that's awesome. And we are looking to do a couple more nature preserves next year, add on a couple more nature preserves to be included in the Maritime Marsh Monitoring Program. And so this one is my favorite, is the Great Tree Frog surveys at Highland Park. So as Danielle was saying, that I was volunteering for the Nature Trust as I was doing my master's, and this is what I was doing, was the Great Tree Frog surveys, because amphibians and reptiles are my favorite. So I'm just going to give you guys some information about what we did for this project, and the results we got. And I'm going to start off with just some information about Highland Park if some of you guys do not know. So like I said, north side of Fredericton, Barker's Point. This property is smaller, so it's only 8 hectares. We have a provincially significant wetland on the property, and we also have a freshwater marsh and a young forest. Highland Park actually has a really unique history. So before the 1940s, this area was mostly used for agriculture. Then in the 40s, it was used for gravel extraction. From 64 to 68, it was actually used as a racetrack. So that oval body of water that you see in this photo, that is where the racetrack used to be. And from 68 to the 90s, the diseased elm were dumped at this area, and so was some waste. In 1990, contaminated soil and petroleum tanks were removed, and then the Nature Trust had it leased. So it's crazy that it went through all of this history, a lot of human disturbance, yet it still ended up turning into a provincially significant wetland, and is home to the great tree frog, and it's also home to monarchs as well. So in flora, so a wide variety, even though it's surrounded by urban development. So I'm just going to give you some information about the great tree frog, for those of you that haven't heard of what they are. So this is a great tree frog on the left. They are about 3 to 5 centimeters in length. They have these large suction cup toe pads, so on their feet. That's why they are a tree frog. They're able to, they normally are on trees. Their color will vary by background, so they can camouflage. This guy is on a very light piece of bark, and that's why he is so bright. But if he was on a dark, wet log, he probably would be brown. They have a unique dorsal pattern, so dorsal being on their back. So on this guy on the left, this black pattern that's going on, that is what's unique. So every individual has this unique pattern on their back. So you can tell an individual, you can separate an individual by looking at that dorsal pattern. And these guys will use a wide variety of habitats. They can be in many areas. So why they're so important to Highland Park is because in the 1990s, great tree frog populations were thought to be very low, and they were mostly in like southern Canada. But in 1996, a population of great tree frogs were found in Fredericton, being what is now Highland Park. And so whenever that was found out, everyone was very surprised, because that was the furthest north that anyone had found a great tree frog. So because of this, some very eager volunteers pushed to have this area protected for the great tree frog. So that's what ended up happening. It was protected, and then we got the lease from the city of Fredericton. But actually, Highland Park actually became the first amphibian park in Canada. And also, Highland Park, why it was named Highland Park is because the great tree frog scientific name is Hyla versicolor. So Highland Park is named after the great tree frog. So we have a lot of threats surrounding Hyla. We have a lot of urban development. We have a lot of invasive species in Highland Park. There's a metal recycling facility close by. So there's many things going on around this park. And so that caused some concerns. So 10 years ago, Nature Trust decided that maybe we should be implementing a monitoring survey so that we can figure out what the population size is of great tree frogs, so that if something happens where they start to decline due to one of the many threats that we have, that we can try and implement something to bring them back. So what the goal of the survey was to obtain a population size and then to monitor it. So generally with frogs, you might just do an auditory survey, so you might just listen for their calls. But because we wanted a population size, we decided to go with a mark and recapture method. Generally with the mark and recapture method, when you're marking, sometimes that's maybe putting a tag on an individual, or with frogs, actually they used to like cut like a toe, like the tip of a toe. Obviously, we did not want to do that. We did not want to harm any of the animals. So instead, we were able to just take photos of their back. So as I was saying, they have a unique dorsal pattern per individual. So by us taking a photo of that individual, we knew who that individual was. So we were able to do a mark and recapture method without actually harming the individuals. And then the second goal was to involve the public. We wanted people to come out and help us, and we needed a lot of volunteers. Actually, we generally had about 15 people that would come out and conduct these surveys with us. So generally what our method was, we actually started this, so it happened in 2012. They did a survey, but then the methods were able to be really repeated without this one specific person being there. So it kind of was left alone until 2017 when I came on, and it took us a little while to figure out the survey method. But in general, what we do is we go out to Highland Park. These volunteers will go and just listen for the gray tree frogs. Then they will move to the closest individual that they can hear, and then they'll capture it with a net. And then they'll put that frog into a container that has been very clean. We also wear gloves to make sure we're not harming the frogs. And then the frogs are brought to me, and I take a photograph of that dorsal pattern. And that's pretty much generally it. So this is what our setup was. We had this light box here with the camera, and you can see that little gray tree frog in the box. So I would take their photo, and then I would go through the photos later. And I just want to show you something that I thought was cool. So this is a gray tree frog, and this guy's pretty dark compared to what some of the other ones that I've been showing you. And you can see this black pattern on his back. But sometimes that's a problem when we look through these photos because it's so dark, you might not be able to compare it with other photos. It might be hard for you to see that black pattern. So because they can change their color, I decided to put them in a lighter colored container and leave them alone for 5 minutes and see if they would change to a lighter color that's more obvious. And it worked. So you can see this guy is a lot lighter. It's a lot easier to see that black pattern. So we just figured this out last year, but it made it so much easier to be able to identify individuals. So in 2018, we ended up catching 45 individuals with 4 recaptures. We weren't going out as late at night. I had volunteers coming at 8 because I didn't want them to come home at like 12 a.m. on a Wednesday. But it turned out that that's what we needed to do. And we needed to go later at night because when they're calling early in the day, they're more scared of predators. But once it's very dark, they don't really care. You can be right up next to them and they'll be calling. I had some gray tree frogs calling in my light box. So it makes it a lot easier. So in 2019, that's what we did. And we caught 141 individuals over, it was about 4 survey nights. And whenever I looked through all the photos, we had 54 recaptures. So these are all males because we're finding, we're only catching the ones that are calling and only males call. So we were able to get a population estimate from here, and I think it was about 250 individuals. So now we have a baseline of what the population size is at Highland Park, and hopefully we'll be able to use that in the future. So that's pretty much it for the gray tree frog surveys. And then one last survey that we have just started doing is duck box monitoring. So we installed 6 duck boxes through Ducks Unlimited, and we will be needing to monitor these boxes now yearly. So you you wait until August or September after the breeding season and after they've hatched, and you go up and you empty out the wood chips, and generally sometimes if there's eggs in there or even just feathers or fur, you can figure out what has been using that box that year. So you go in and look at that, and then you replace it with more wood chips. So we just put up these boxes, so we haven't started doing the monitoring yet, but if people are interested in maybe coming out and doing some duck buck monitoring with us, just let us know. So that is all I have for you guys today. We currently have a Passport to Nature webinar series going on, so we do them monthly. The next one coming up is October 7th at 3 p.m. and it's about a guide to tree ID in New Brunswick. So if you guys are interested in that, you guys can go to our website and register. And if anyone's interested in volunteering or doing any of the things that I was just talking about, definitely give me an email. Or if you had questions about maybe things that I was saying at the beginning that I didn't really expand on, then definitely give me an email. So thank you to all of our sponsors. And does anyone have any questions? I guess I should probably go into the question box. So first question, wondering if the nature preserves are well signed to prevent unwanted recreational activities. So we do have some nature preserve, well, so yeah, many of them do have signage unless the donor might have said otherwise, or sometimes we don't put signs up or don't even advertise a nature preserve because it might have a species at risk, a sensitive species at risk. So for those ones, we think it's better to just not tell anyone about that preserve. But in general, we do. Generally, we do have maybe small conserve signs, or we'll have big interpretive signs that tell you that it's a nature preserve. And then we will also potentially have things that might say what's permitted and what's not permitted, especially when we start having problems. We have put up like no ATV signs or no fires, but normally they might be shot or taken down or something. So we've been trying to more so maybe try and build relationships with neighbors to see if we can work something out instead of just putting up these signs and hoping for the best. We do have no hunting disc signs that are on our preserves as well. Some preserves do allow hunting, but for the ones that don't, we do have no hunting signs. Second question, there's an active birding community in New Brunswick. Have you reached out to Birding MB on Facebook to look for volunteers? I'm not sure is that a specific area for birding? We have reached out to like St. John Nature Club and a couple other nature clubs, but I'm not sure. I don't think we've reached, maybe we haven't reached out to just generally birding. But we'll have to look into that. I'll write that down. I see one in the chat that says, do you visit and help guide property owners who do cut a small amount of firewood for personal use, but also want to be responsible to responsibly manage their land? Yes, we do. We do help with those plans. Obviously, you do want to do things like that. Nature preserves, we don't, but the conservation department will help landowners, maybe even talking about which maybe trees to cut or maybe how to replace some of them. But yeah, they definitely will talk to landowners about even if they do cut, for sure. So if that is something that you would like to do, you can, I can give you you can maybe email me, or you can go to the website, and in the conservation department, the Land Stewardship Program, there should be an email there that you can contact. But yeah, they definitely do help landowners. Oh, it's a Facebook group where everyone shares bird photos. Okay, I'll write that down. I'll see if we did. We probably should reach out again. Even if we might have done it before, but we definitely should do it again. And I think that's all the questions that I see.
Yeah, thank you, Shailene, for your talk on the Nature Trust and all of the amazing work that you and your organization are doing. I do have one quick question. Actually, there's another one that just came up in the questions there. So how do you go about identifying the land NBNT would like to preserve?
So we have a list of things that we would like to protect on a preserve. So we kind of think about, is there like things like wetlands, marshes, maybe shoreline, those are kind of higher priority. And then we also think about things like, has there been like a quarry there, or has there been a recent clear cut, or something that all comes into factors. We do have like a mapping system that kind of prioritizes areas, but when we're thinking about buying property, that's become actually easier for us to do lately because we now have a target. So it's easier for us to get funding to buy nature preserves. Easier, kind of. It's not like really, really easy, but we've been able to get some properties because of it. But whenever we're thinking of donors who are donating it, like we wouldn't accept like a donation if it's like a clear cut. We want something that has like ecological significance, because then the stewardship department is going to have to take that on and trying to restore it or do other things with it. But generally it's land that has some sort of ecological significance, like the wetlands or shorelines. And then taking into account if there's any problems that are on these properties that might cause a lot of time and effort, whether or not it's worth it to put the time and effort to try and restore or do whatever to those properties. I hope that answered your question. If you have more, if I didn't clearly answer it, I don't help with the acquisition, but I do know Carly LaRue is our acquisition manager if you ever wanted more information.
Great. And I just actually had one quick question too. Just wondering what the first step should be for people who are interested in learning more about how they can conserve their own lands.
I think the best way would be to go through on our website, which glad that you were able to share, would be to go through it and go to the conservation department and speak to Carly LaRue, because she would be the best one to talk about conserving. Or if you didn't want to donate land but you want to try and conserve it for ecological significance, then that would be in the conservation department as well. Aaron Downing, he is the manager of that as well. So if it's hard for you guys to find that on our website, just give me an email at shaylin.wallace@ntnb.org, and I can send you their contact information.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that really interesting presentation. Shaylin volunteered to participate in our event just a few days ago, so I imagine that it was a bit of a stressful scramble to get prepared. So again, thank you for participating. If you'd like to learn more about the Nature Trust of New Brunswick and the work that they do, then please check out their website and social media. I posted the links there in the chat room.
Thank you.
All right, bye-bye.